So thank you for joining me for session 2 of our Community of Practice focused on social innovation and change-making and service here at Drake. We are offering this as a series of 4 sessions to dig into this theme of change-making. As you are aware, there is a big idea that's informing our next fundraising campaign around this theme of change-making, but it's not just a fundraising strategy. Change-making is a practice and a pedagogy that we are adopting in community-engaged learning as well as across the university in a variety of departments as a strategy and a way to engage students deeper in their learning, in the community, as well as being part of the solution to create some change and development within their communities and their own lives. So I'm going to advance and give you a quick review. I guess I forgot to introduce myself as well. So for those who don't know me, my name is Renee Seblicek-Lee, and I serve as Director of the Community Engaged Learning Office here at Drake. And a little bit of background of my interest in this topic is I've been in the community engagement, traditional service learning world or environment for about 15 years now, having as a professional, and then 4 years prior to that. So having started as a service learning student in my undergraduate experience, and then went on to serve as a student leader in the community-based learning office, and then an AmeriCorps member in that office, and then eventually a professional staff role at a small liberal arts college in Northeast Iowa, all within the frame of service learning and community engagement and community development. And in 2019, I had the opportunity to go to the Ashoka U Exchange, which Ashoka is the international organization that brings together social entrepreneurs from around the world. And they had a college-focused symposium conference where they would bring together people from across the United States to talk about what this looks like in terms of can we teach change making? Can we create change makers as part of our program and our curriculum? And while I was there, I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that what they were talking about was so similar to what we talk about in community engagement circles, but those conversations weren't crossing over or overlapping. And in fact, there were only me and 2 other people from my traditional community engagement professional circle that were at this conference. And so that really started me getting interested in exploring, well, is this different? Is it the same? There's so much overlap. And what I've come to determine is that change-making is this larger philosophy and pedagogy of creating change, positive change, hopefully, and that service learning or community service and entrepreneurship are all part of this continuum. And that change-making really is this broader umbrella that helps us talk about the work, but the strategies and the way in which we engage our students in this work is going to look different depending on the discipline. It's going to look different depending on the social issue or the problem we're trying to solve. It's going to look different depending on just the community partner involved and what's needed. So that's the background of how we got here. So last session, what we did is we brought together a group of folks, and Susan Sanning from Grinnell College up the road presented on their service and social innovation ecosystem for civic action. And the reason I brought Grinnell in is because of all the other schools that we're aware of in Iowa, Grinnell and Drake are the only 2 that are really thinking this way and talking about this from a blending of traditional community service, service learning, social entrepreneurship, and social innovation. The other models that we're aware of really keep those items separate in practice as well as in theory. And so Drake is trying to do something new and innovative by providing room and space for all of these to work together and exist. She led with the 5 core values that guide their work. And I can send out the recording and the link to this PowerPoint after this session. So I won't go into details, but you'll notice that their understanding of service and social innovation is rooted in principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion, collaboration, power-aware partnerships. She went into this exercise around power chairs and how often we enter service relationships as subject, me, the service provider, you, the service recipient, as object, right? And I am here to work on you, work with you. It's often the power dynamic. And what does it look like if we can shift those chairs away from like one person on top of the other looking down to both facing outward, so that it's truly subject to subject, and that the object we are directing our efforts toward is then the issue, right? So the object becomes water quality, and you and I are working on that together. And then she introduced the concept of their social innovation, service and social innovation ecosystem. And to dive into this just a little bit, this is the way that they are framing it at Grinnell. Love this model and hope that we can start to develop our own ecosystem, maybe using some of these principles. And that's then what brings us to today's session, is I want to provide you an overview of how then service and social innovation looks as of right now here at Drake, dive into some frameworks that we're exploring, and then really spend the rest of the session dialoguing. Many of you on the call today have been involved, like I said, with the big ideas and in championing what needs to go into change making and how do we want to talk about that here at Drake. And so today is kind of an opportunity to dig into that based on some of these frameworks. So to quickly describe theirs, service is where we have traditionally spent a lot of our time when we think about change making or community engagement. And it's the direct one-to-one meeting immediate needs experiences, right? So people are hungry today. So we're going to go serve them soup today. We're going to get them food today. Activism then brings the educational component, an awareness making component. And so if service is feeding people today the food that they need, activism is creating awareness to other people that some people are hungry and need food. And so it's creating that awareness, possibly talking about illuminating that issue. Systems thinking then is looking at the root causes and the various issues and problems around food security that help us understand why people are hungry. And it's not to say that one is better than the other, but as you see, these overlap. And the reality is for effective and efficient change making, we need all three. Change making is broadly creating change. Social innovation is providing new solutions that address long-term systemic issues, right? And it's we'll see here in a little bit in some slides, it's focused on that changing the system piece, so that it's not about who's hungry and why they're hungry, but that we've eliminated the reason, period, why people are hungry. So once again, I'll send out the links. And I'll pause here. Is there any questions up to this point? That was just a review of our first community of practice. When I see from the chat, Mary McCarthy says, one of our young alums, Lauren Geetz, maybe pronouncing that incorrectly, spent a year working for Ashoka in Egypt. Awesome. Right. Well, then let's dig into today's session. Our agenda, like I said, is to overview kind of our service and social innovation ecosystem as I understand it. I do want to preface it that way. You are going to have awareness of things happening that I'm not aware of. And so I invite you to volunteer that information and share that with the group. And then we are going to introduce the Pathways framework, which is what we're using out of the Office of Community Engaged Learning. to help us align student involvement in social and community projects and service. So for those who are unfamiliar with our office, we report up through the Associate Provost for Equity and Inclusion. Or sorry, oh my gosh, totally missed that. Associate Provost for Academic Excellence and Student Success. And we therefore play a support role in helping engage students, but also preparing faculty and staff in how to engage their students ethically and with best practices around this kind of work. Our ultimate mission then is to develop and encourage change makers who know themselves, understand the complexities of the world they live in, and take creative action to solve social problems. So as we think about the work that we do across campus, those are the three pillars that we are constantly keeping in mind. Is how do we create programming and experience for students to really understand who they are, explore their identity in light of diversity, equity, and inclusion, in light of their values, in light of their past experiences, and maybe their potential career focus and their major. How can they understand the complexities of the world? Because it's one thing to know yourself, but then to really understand the complexities that exist, and then therefore to examine your power and the privilege and the roles that you play in some of those complexities. And then ultimately, hopefully, we're equipping you through resources, through advising, through coursework, to be able to take some action, and whatever that may look like for you or the social problem that is being addressed. And so one way that we are starting to frame that engagement, that action piece, is through the pathways. So this is a model that comes out of Stanford University, their Haas Center for Public Service, and we are part of an international working group of about 40 different institutions across the world who are using this framework as a method to engage our students and as a method to talk about the different ways that they can be involved in taking creative action. So this tool not only serves as this framework, which puts things in a nice box of 6, but also then has a survey component where students can engage in different reflection around these pathways. They're asked 4 different questions about their past involvement in that path, their likelihood to make an impact in that path, what in general what kind of impact do they think that path has, and then one question that I'm currently blanking on. And then at the end, it spits out this really nice report. But the power of this tool then is in the debrief and in the reflection that student has on their results and on, once again, who they are as a person, and then where they see themselves making a difference in the world. So we offer then one-to-one follow-up sessions for students who are interested in exploring that. And so if you are interested in looking at this a little bit deeper, you can go to Drake's website and in the search box put pathways, and it should bring you up to our page. And then the link, or Amanda, you're on the call, if you want to put the link directly to that page so that faculty and staff know where the consultation request link is, that would be fantastic. So want to very quickly go through each of these paths from the lens of what we currently are offering here at Drake. So as I mentioned, there's 6 nice, colorful, neat boxes. However, the limitation to this tool is that life and engagement does not fit into 6 nice, neat boxes. And so the idea behind this framework is not to track students, if you will, but it's to give them a framework for at least kind of thinking about different ways to engage as a starting point. As we know, there's far more than 6 ways to be involved in community, but these large buckets allow us to at least kind of compartmentalize in a way for programming purposes to help us organize student involvement. and they may come in and out of pathways, and obviously social issues, to address them at their core, need people working on the issue from all different lenses using all of these different pathways. So what do these pathways look like in action here at Drake? This is where we're going to get into kind of the overview of our social innovation and service ecosystem. By the numbers, we know that Drake faculty, staff, and students are engaged in community, hands down. We make a commitment to all Drake students coming in that they will have the opportunity to serve. We know from a survey that we've done with faculty and staff in the past that more than 70% are engaged in community service activities outside of their profession. We know that 86% have had an experience or have an experience in either service learning or community-based learning as it relates to their course, or outside of their course with their Greek Life organization or in the Don V. Adams Leadership Institute. And we also know that about a third of our academic programs have at least one course offered that has a community component. So we are an engaged campus, no doubt. So what does community engaged learning then, that pathway, look like? So for Drake, we define community engaged learning as an instructional strategy that refers to community activities integrated with course content, and it provides an enriching experiential learning opportunity to address the public good. Some examples: public relations students developing PR plans for nonprofit organizations, data analytics students collecting data and analyzing donor and volunteer data for a local org, health science students conducting focus groups with food pantry users, or students interviewing tenants and former clients of affordable housing programs. I see Mary McCarthy's on the call. A political science course focused on human trafficking that's working with local organizations to create awareness and advocacy around that issue. So lots of different ways. What you're going to notice, though, is that these projects are often very one-to-many, right? One course to many service recipients, or one course to a project with lots of moving parts. And so they're, for the most part at Drake, currently the foundation is really in that service aspect. And we're going to talk a little bit here in a bit about how to move, maybe how to diversify those kinds of experiences. But right now, that's a handful of experiences from across campus. Direct service. So service is taking place in the classroom, but primarily as we think of direct service, we think of the co-curricular space. And so we've got student service organizations doing this work. Alejandro's on the call. I'll give a shout out to the College of Business and Public Administration, who now has a Dean's Honor Roll for social impact, in which students log 20 hours of at a variety of places in return for being named to the honor roll, getting special privilege to meet with Alejandro. And then we've got Drake, what I consider like Drake sponsored service programs. So Next Course Food Recovery, which is a project where students will recover the food left over from catering and dining hall events and then deliver it out to nonprofit organizations here in Des Moines that could use those foods for feeding people. The program started with a pilot over Drake Relays back in around 2016, has now since then, even with the pandemic, we were doing a little bit. We had obviously quite a bit of a pause with the pandemic, but the students have recovered more than 31,000 pounds of food that would have otherwise gone to the landfill. So think about the impact that just that project alone can have. Sprout Garden, another kind of Drake-sponsored program, comes out of the Office of Community Engaged Learning. We bring students from the Boys and Girls Club over to the garden twice a week for programming, and they learn about health and nutrition. Recently, our garden was relocated, and we've been able to expand our capacity to include a half-acre food forest. Students this week will actually be out there planting trees on Friday. And so another great example of ways that students can be involved. So students are involved in the weeding and the maintenance, but then also in running programming, and eventually, hopefully, in some of the environmental and conservation practices related to the food forest. Policy and governance pathway. We have some examples on the screen in terms of last year and the year before. We've had students engaged with the Campus Election Engagement Project, which provided a fellowship for a Drake student to lead efforts on campus around civic engagement, specifically related to voter registration. Student Senate since then has created a senator. Keep looking over here, by the way, because that's where my screen is at. Student Senate has created a student senator for civic engagement to increase students' engagement in political life. And then you may be familiar, if you're not, Iowa has a caucus, and Dr. Rachel Payne Caulfield leads a project connected to a political science course that tells the story of the campaign and politics in Iowa, and sharing information along leading up to the Iowa caucus. Community organizing and activism pathway. Some key signature examples here. The Paint It Black project, which came about as a result of students being fed up with racism and hatred and other things that were taking place. And as part of that rally that you see on the screen, one action that came out of that was a project to paint our painted street black in recognition of the movement, and in recognition of coming together as a campus to say that this kind of behavior is not something we endorse, and for the campus to come together in solidarity. That did happen, and Painted Street was painted solid black. And to commemorate that event, there's now a plaque, and you'll notice a black circle that is permanently part of the Painted Street now, to commemorate that. That led to then additional work with our Office of Equity and Inclusion. And so it's not just the demonstration piece, but it's about the conversation, dialogue, and the way that then students have been able to be involved in helping push and shift the community and our policies around equity and inclusion. CAB, the Community Action Board, holds social justice dialogues with students on different topics. Another great example was when LEAD and DEAL, this is several years old now, so this is pre-2013, but we used to actually sell water bottles on campus, and they got together and put together a campaign and advocated for banning water bottles. And you'll notice that as of today in 2021, you cannot buy a bottle of water on Drake's campus. And we have water filling stations, and the number, of faculty, staff, and students who actually, it's just common culture now to carry your own water jug. Philanthropy pathway. Student Alumni Association is probably one of the organizations most known on campus for the work around philanthropy. They have a program intentionally focused on helping college students understand the role of philanthropy and what it means to be involved and give back. And this Catch the Bug is in honor of Maddie Levitt. And if you were ever around on campus when Maddie was here, she was known for her iconic yellow Volkswagen Beetle. And so that's a play on her inspiration. And then the Little Free Pantries being another project. And so we have 10 located scattered throughout the neighborhood, and a few outlying neighborhoods as well. And at least the 2 that are on campus, students, faculty, and staff consistently band together to collect donations, stock the pantries. Griff has been a fantastic supporter of the Little Pantry Project and using his network to garner collections and get those filled as well. Lastly, but definitely not least, is social entrepreneurship and corporate social responsibility. I'm sure there are more examples than what I can think of, but the two that are probably the most prominent on Drake's campus and well-known is the Bark Tank Pitch Competition and the Lorenzen Student Hatchery. Neither of these are exclusive to social entrepreneurship. They are more about promoting business incubation, business development, or entrepreneurship broadly. But there are students who've come through those programs who have pitched and ended up developing social enterprises or social endeavors. And one of the ones on the screen to highlight is Opportunity on Deck. Our alum, Dylan DeClerc, started this organization when he was actually in school and has now gone on to serve as the executive director, lead a merger with another organization. And so they're now called Can Play. And just a really great example of using business practices to meet community needs that weren't being met. And so his whole focus, the organization's focus, is engaging youth who are traditionally underserved when it comes to the sports, like Little League programming, and get them the resources they need to be able to participate in those programming. Otherwise, they wouldn't have the opportunity to. So those are the 6 pathways and examples of how those paths look at Drake. Are there any, up to this point, any questions or comments? All right. So now to transition and get into hopefully me talking less and you and I having dialogue. As I mentioned, a lot of our work up to this point has been more of that transactional work. I would even venture to say oftentimes it has started with, or ideas originated with us and with either our learning goals or student interest or whatever. And then we go out and we find a cause to champion or a partner agency to work with. And what we're trying to shift and strengthen as we look at social innovation and change making is not only our approach, but then the level of impact that we can have by thinking a little bit differently, by expanding our approach to this work. So direct service meets the immediate need, but if we were to scale that service, more people could receive the benefit. But what would it look like if we actually addressed the root causes of a problem and helped change behavior and change the way that people are approaching a problem? And we did something like a water bottle ban that ultimately changed the framework of a culture or a campus. So for example, I mentioned it's common behavior now to see people carrying around their own water bottles, but that wasn't necessarily the case back in early 2000s. But as a result of students being involved in creating this advocacy project around water bottles, all these years later, we now have literally changed the framework. Oh, another example, bike library. Many of you may be familiar with this, but the problem or the issue that was posited to students was, how do we create a more bike-friendly neighborhood? And long story short, over the course of 18 months, students came up with the idea of, well, in order to create more bike friendliness, we need more people to have access to bikes. That's one piece of the solution. So through a matter of lead concentration, a first-year seminar, a couple of capstone projects, then we're able, in writing a grant, we were able to then purchase supplies, and we now have a library in front of Olmsted that students, faculty, and staff check out bikes. So the power of this example is if it were just direct service, then students would have just collected bikes and given bikes out to people. You get a bike, Mary Pat. You get a bike, Amanda. You get a bike, Matthew Mitchell. But then what happens is it's just that one-to-one. And it met Mary's needs, but didn't necessarily Renee's needs. So they came up with and they didn't know they were doing this at the time, but they came up with a scaled solution, which is a bike library that allows more people to have access to bikes. Mary Pat, any questions?
Yeah. Renee, when you have your right hand up by your ear, we can't hear you very well.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt, but.
No, can you hear me better now? This thing keeps falling off.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. First world technology problem, sorry. But ultimately what that led to was when the city decided they're going to redo University Avenue they had to put some pipes and things in. Bikeability was forefront of their mind. And when they went to then redo the street, they physically built in bike paths. And so there's now physical infrastructure that contributes to making the Drake neighborhood more bike friendly. Are we there yet? I would argue no. But ultimately, what would it look like if then once again if the culture became more about biking, we would see more bikes on the streets, we'd see probably less cars coming to campus and moving around the neighborhood, which ultimately reduces our carbon emission, and on and on and on and on. And we become known as a bike-friendly area. Matthew, did you have something you wanted to say?
I think I heard a question in there, and I just wanted to super clarify what you're looking for. Is the question, what does that change look like? Or did you want some of our feedback on that issue?
We can. I mean, if you have thoughts around that.
Biking, or I think biking was a good example, but I think the question came from sort of the paragraph before, which was like in general, or I'm just trying to be a good meeting participant here.
Yeah. Was it from this?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. So I would love to engage in talking about examples that you're aware of that are similar in nature. So I provide the bike library as an example of moving through this scale. So I was not clear about that.
Gotcha.
So this is a framework of how we can talk about the level of impact we have in the community. The bike project becomes an example of what that looks like in practice. And why I think we often stay here is because this is what our higher education schedule allows for, right? One class, 15 weeks, there's only so much you can do. In order to pull off this bike project, it was 6 classes over the course of 18 months, held together by some administrative support, funding from an external partner, and engagement then from an external partner, the Bike Collective, which is now the Street Collective, to make this come about.
And can you go back to that model one more time? I'm just going to take a quick picture so I can reference it. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're asking if we're aware of other examples of that, yes. Correct?
Yep. Aware of other examples, as well as, or are there things you're working on that you think could be moved to this level? So let me give you 2 more examples that are currently working, or currently in the works. So Elizabeth Talbert from sociology, part of her expertise is in the affordable housing area, and she's teaching Art of the Interview, which is a sociology course. It's a methods course, so students, the primary objective is to teach students how to do interviews. But we actually came to her with this idea to say, what would it look like if your course was part of one of these larger impact stories? And we have to start somewhere, and the place that we have to start is in building the empathy and really understanding the issue at hand. And so her students are going out. We're partnering with 4 different housing agencies, who then are serving intermediary to connect us to former tenants and current clients and participants of their program. And our students are going to be interviewing and getting the life history of folks in order to unearth and tell the story of the lack of affordable housing, or what that experience is like here in Des Moines. It's a major issue everywhere, but particularly here in central Iowa. The picture on the screen is from a recent Des Moines Register article announcing yet again one more low-income housing unit that's being taken off the market, in this case for renovations. But what's yet to remain unseen is that will those renovations raise the rent price, which then won't allow the tenants that live there now to move back in, therefore displacing them and not allowing them, or not affording them a place to live. We could say one and done. Elizabeth has taught her course, met her objectives. Here you go, nonprofits, here's the data. But instead, with keeping that impact model in mind, we're now using that literally as the foundation and trying to tee up and figure out, are there other courses, are there internships, is there, and using that pathways framework, is there advocacy or philanthropy? What are all the different pieces that we could play a part in while still meeting our learning objectives as a university and engaging our students? But that if then we step back 48 months from now, let's say, way into the future, we could say, as a result of this volunteer experience, this philanthropy thing we did over here, this class or classes, look at what we've been able to accomplish in partnership. The other example, Mary Pat is involved in this one as well, the Iowa Rural Food Security Project. This is a unique example that actually lives within the graduate programming, and not only graduate programming, but graduate programming between 2 different schools. We've got the law school involved, and the public administration, Masters of Public Administration program out of the College of Business. Same thing. We go into it initially with our old mindset. We're going to help create solutions to why there's food insecurity in rural Iowa. And by doing this stuff well, you start to ask more questions than you come in with a solution. And where we're at is almost 2 years into this project. And all we've done, and it's actually a lot, but if you were to look at the old service model, all we've done is listen to community, right? And we've surveyed and really trying to understand it from the needs of food security. This is a project that was actually brought to us by an external partner who works across the state around this issue, and asked for some of our involvement. And so we're little by little building this as we go. Think again, 48, 56, whatever, how many months from now, what could this look like if we engage other aspects of campus in this topic? So if you're interested in learning specifically about that project, I invite you to come back on November 17th. Denise and Jenny will be with us talking about that on a session. So anyways, that, Matthew, I want to turn it back to your comment and invite participation, because I have done a lot of talking.
I think Mary has her hand up. Actually, both Marys.
All right. Well, Mary Wolford, I can see you, so I invite you to chime in. I'm going to stop sharing.
So as you're presenting, Renee, and this is really helpful actually to see the framework, because in our group we talk a lot about this. What I'm wondering is, if there's been any kind of a survey of faculty across campus and their course activities or related activities in that would be considered community service, social entrepreneurship, etc. Because my notion is there are a lot of people doing a lot of things. And we don't know about it, which is a common complaint, right? That communication, especially across colleges. That's one comment. I also, when you were walking through, I think it was like a continuum, I kept thinking about maybe the need for two brief trainings, one on systems thinking. And I think, Matthew, that's something, I know you do a little bit of work in, and then root cause analysis, because I know in my justice reform course, there are lots of reforms out there that people are pitching, but do they really meet, or do policymakers really get to the root cause, right? Which often are found within social determinants of health, that broad wellness model. And then if I could just quickly share, I crafted a course in justice reform. I teach it in law, politics, and society. Every course session is team taught with someone who is in an organization that champions justice reform. So we've had Brian Stevenson's group, Sister Helen Prejean. We've had the Innocence Project, the Governor's Focus Committee, the governor, the Director of Corrections, on and on and on. So what that did in class is it gave students an opportunity to connect with individuals. And by the way, pretty high-ranking people, when you've got Brian Stevenson and Sister Prejean. And then each student conducted formal research and wrote a policy reform paper, which we are now publishing in a book. From that course, we had a student enter an internship with the Innocence Project. We have another student looking to work with the Equal Justice Initiative upon after graduation. And right now, we're working with the legal clinic to research evidence collection across the state of Iowa. In particular, evidence, policies, and procedures related to biospecimens. So we know there's a backlog of DNA analysis on rape kits, 3 to 4 years backlog. So, I think there are lots of projects like this across campus. And if we articulated them in some way, I just know individually, I would be so high reading what people are doing, faculty, students, administrators, and others. And then just one last thing, sorry, I'm taking up a little bit too much time. But there is an empathy scale out there, Renee, and I used it in research with medical students years ago. And what we found was, as medical students entered into internships, worked with kids on oncology units and their parents and thus and such, their empathy scale grew. So they developed empathy. And in one, I think you had a Venn diagram of levels of empathy or perspectives related to empathy. And I think given all the work you're doing and this at the Changemaker Big Idea, if there would be some way we could, have students complete the Jefferson Empathy Scale, and then later, a year or two later, have them do it again and do a pre and post t-test to look at growth and empathy scores. That might be something we could use, in a grant or something later, right? Or even to talk about it as a really cool outcome. Yep. Okay, that's it, guys. I'm sorry, I went a little long.
No, thank you. And I think you hit it on your head, right? So I want to go back to my very first preface, which was this is from my lens, and why I'm excited, and I thank you for sharing your justice reform course as an example, is because one, it's a fantastic example of this broader framework of change making, right? And the way in which we've thought about this work up to this point is more limited to CEL, community engaged learning, as the examples I gave or the way I framed it. And so where I love where this is headed is it helps us think a little bit more broadly. So I'll follow up because I need to get more details so we can start. So the next time something like this comes up, your course is listed as an example. So Mary McCarthy, you've had your hand up for a long time. Please jump in.
Well, I first just want to say thank you, Renee. This has been an excellent presentation. It's really exciting to hear the work and the accomplishments that you outlined, and that we heard from Mary Pat and from Matt as well. I have two comments or thoughts listening to you. The first is that for my human trafficking course, one way in which you and I worked on developing it in positive ways was by having this community partner orientation, which I think went really well. And listening to you now, I was thinking, if I conceived, or when we enter into these types of courses, we conceive them rather than as a one semester course, as a multi-year project, where students were in the course. Let's say if you have it every spring or whatever, like my course, you know, students enter into the project, but it is being conceived of as a multi-year project. And so when you sit down with the community partners, you know, to have that conversation, what are your goals? If we think of this as a multi-year project, what are your goals? How can we contribute given the constraints of, well, we can offer this just every spring? Or that would be the course, but would you want someone who was there longer term? So maybe someone who's taking the course, but who also would continue on with a summer internship, or, you know, things like that. So I think that's one way that kind of my frame of thinking, I think I was already thinking of it that way in a sense, because I've seen how each spring builds on the one that came before. And so this might be a more effective way to have it be, you know, the greater impact, right? Rather than, oh, every spring I teach this course. Okay, so students get the 20, however many hours, you know, the 40 hours or whatever of experience, then it becomes this larger project. But the second comment I have is about the amount of work that this takes. And so I am wondering, and, you know, you mentioned Elizabeth Talbert, and I know, you know, her position at Drake is not a tenured faculty member. So given all of this work that this type of commitment takes from the faculty perspective, I'm wondering if there is buy-in from the administration in terms of promotion and tenure considerations, right? Whether this type of work actually is being valued at the administration level. So I guess those are my two questions / comments.
Yeah. You raise great questions, particularly the promotion and tenure. I can say face value. I don't know if that's the right word, but yes, there's significant support. But then how that translates is challenging, because each department and then college has, you know, their own process for P&T. So definitely an area that we need to draw some attention to. Part of what I'm hoping maybe an outcome of this session is one, that this is just hopefully to reinvigorate the conversation, because with the pandemic, things just kind of came to a halt. And I'm glad to see that there's so many people still interested in this conversation, and liking the direction of where at least those of us who've stayed a little bit more on the ground are trying to take this. And I would invite Mary, like whether it be you or others on the call, for us to, I think what it's going to take is faculty voice in championing that, and faculty collective voice, because it's definitely something faculty individual level are talking about. But I, as a non-faculty member, I'm not sure what the full process would be to make that garner more attention. But I'm open to ideas and figuring out how I can at least support that movement. But you nail whatever the phrase is. You nailed the nail on the head. Hit the nail on the head.
Hey, Renee, you're talking about specifically support from this generic institution for faculty. Let me give you just a 15-minute case study, 15-second case study in the college business. We are part of an academy. The academy is hundreds of years old, and we aren't going to change the structures and strictures of the academy for promotion and tenure overnight. However, I think our accrediting body, the AACSB, has given us a huge shot in the arm by valuing impact over just research. And dare I say, more than anything we could do endogenously within the University of Drake, the accrediting body sort of saying, we now value social impact, we now value community outreach of faculty into the community, has changed the culture almost 180 degrees from when I started 11, 12 years ago. So I think we are riding a wave of greater acceptance, and you've got some good momentum. And so I don't know if that's encouraging or what, but I think we are somewhat, I don't want to say powerless against those larger forces, but it's nice to know that wave is continuing, and especially within business, just a huge consideration for this type of activity in our promotion and tenure calculations as a result of that accreditation change.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew, for your comment.
Renee, a quick comment and follow up to Matthew's. First of all, when expectations change, and they have to change very quickly because we know the state of higher education, right? So our expectations for programming, our expectations for student engagement, our expectations for faculty excellence in andragogy, etc., right, have changed. And if there's an expectation for significant community engagement and social responsibility, right, our P&T standards need to change. And though we have had standards for 100 plus years, Matthew, I know from my experience at other institutions, when faculty engage, things can happen very swiftly. And I would suggest that we really take a strong look at that. If the big ideas are about the future of the university, everything I think needs to be reviewed, evaluated, and modified to champion where we want to go. At one institution, the board eliminated tenure with one fell swoop, and the next day I was asked to deal with it. Faculty are very resilient. I think faculty are imaginative and creative. And I trust that the faculty at Drake could build systems that support where the university believes it needs to be to survive another 100 years. Just opinion.
Yep. So I'm realizing we're at time. I do want, if you need to leave, I totally respect that. I do want to recognize we've focused a lot of this conversation on the curricular side of the house, and we have student life folks intentionally on this call. And so I wanted to invite Kristen or Isaac or anyone else for your thoughts and reflections. Anything that would be helpful to share with the group, or just kind of what you're thinking in terms of, we know we have work to do on the academic side, but does this align with where we're headed on the co-curricular side, and just your thoughts and reflections on that?
I'll Rudy or Isaac, you want to jump in first? I want to yield to you too with student life in general.
Yes, Rudy. Sorry, did not see your name on the list.
No, I love it. I was just typing too because I have a meeting that is going on right now that I got to jump to. But I would love to be on in support in any way that we can in our offices here. So if we could follow up, Kevin,
Yeah.
I would love to talk to you and see
Perfect.
what ways that we can get together. But no, I think this is awesome. For
Isaac,
sure.
do you want to share for the larger group who you are?
Yeah, so for those who don't know me, my name is Isaac. I'm the Director of Student Life here. Started last February, so still getting my feet wet, but really excited on the things that our offices are doing and have done so far. So any way that we can collaborate, we're all on board for that. So yeah,
Perfect. Well, thank you
yeah,
for your
but
time.
for sure, Kevin and I will reach out to you, and we'd love to talk a little bit more.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks, Isaac.
I mean, I'll just for context, I think one of the things that we're excited about within campus life. So I'm Rudy Trey, I'm the Assistant Dean of Students. And so our purview is Isaac's area, which is the Office of Student Life, the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life, the Office of Spiritual Life, Prevention Education Programs, and then Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiatives through the Dean of Students Office. So there's great headway to be made. I think one of the things that we find ourselves in right now, and Renee, you alluded to this, is how do we allow for co-curricular engagement to be more than just transactional?
Yeah.
How do we really strive to provide an experience that extends beyond, going to a one-day event or being a student leader for a year? And so there is, in full honesty and transparency, there is a lot of work that has to be done in that arena. Isaac being part of our team, as well as many others. So, I would echo Isaac's excitement to help support that, but also knowing, right now we're just trying to at least set a foundation for campus life to at least meet those needs from a student perspective. And also I'll say, historically, the campus life and student life, specifically Isaac's department, has really been where that department's essentially just kind of, it's not even been transactional. It's been, this is the policy from the Office of Student Life. As student leaders, abide by the policy. And so one of the things we're working on is how do we make it transactional, in the sense that we're also hearing from our students the experience that they want, the resources that they need, and the support that, frankly, they deserve as student leaders in our area. And then from there, we're able to elevate it to, I think, what you're alluding to as far as change making. So certainly looking forward to some growth avenues within this area in the next couple of years.
Wonderful. Thanks,
Yeah.
Rudy.
I'll for sure follow up, Renee, but thank you for all this.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for joining today.
Yep.
Kristen, you don't have to say anything, but if you want to.
I would not take much time. I think it reminds me a little bit in a different vein. I know we've talked a lot at some of our other meetings regarding leadership development about not having every program do everything for every student, and really focusing on how to be niche in ways that are helpful and not hurtful or inaccessible for students. But hearing your description in terms of some of the direct service up through the sort of structural framework changes makes me think a lot about, in the same vein of the way that we're doing that with outcomes in terms of leadership training on campus, both through the leadership minor and through the Adams Institute. So I think there's definite alignment in talking about how, with our students, we talk about people don't follow people they don't like. And it's really hard to make effective change when you're somebody nobody wants to work with and nobody wants to be around. And so thinking about where some of the connections between that scale up that you mentioned and some of our work with emotional intelligence and intentional emergence curriculum, I think there can be some really great partnership there. So anything we can do to help support or collaborate, absolutely. Thanks for all your work.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and I'll wrap this up actually in connection to Kevin's comment in the chat box, asking for a shared space, a summit to build on this energy. And we are planning one. It's not till next semester. And so I invite the continued conversation until then, whether that be one-on-one or through follow-up. I can keep this meeting chat open as well. But the Global Citizen Forum is an opportunity we have to capitalize on some of this energy. And so it's a annual event that we do every year. And March 1, 2, 3, 4 is when it will take place. And on March 3rd specifically, we are going to be putting together an opportunity for this shared space and dialogue. And so I will send out details once that's firmed up, and hope that many of you from this group can continue, because this, I think the way, in light of change making, the way that this work is going to come together is through the collective power of everyone's involvement. So thank you all so much for your time, and appreciate you being part of the conversation today.